years and talk about that very taboo word. And I'm actually reading a book about money because I'm a very cool person. And in the book, they talk about the fact that the word debt is synonymous in many languages with the word for shame. I know this is true in Dutch, but I've heard similar things in other cultures as well, in other languages. So, debt is an interesting thing because, at least in the Western world, many of our countries were built on debt. It's a fascinating part of financial services, and it continues to develop and change all the time. It is reborn in different ways. So, Peter, I wanted to ask you about this because you're quite open about the fact that you dealt with your own debt when you were in your 20s. So, what are the headlines when it comes to people understanding debt? And why is it so important for us to have debt as a part of our financial vocabulary?
Yeah, so I think you're right. There's a lot of taboo, shame, stigma attached to the word debt. All the
Mhm.
way through my 20s, halfway through my 30s, I was in debt. Overdrafts, personal loans, credit cards, you name it, I had it. And I think fundamentally, people need to understand the difference between good and bad debt. I mean, there is
Mhm.
good debt, there is toxic debt. Things like, your credit cards, which are open ended credit facilities, that's bad debt. It takes a plan and discipline to be able
Mhm.
to manage that appropriately. You've got things like overdrafts here in the UK, which has now become one of the most expensive forms of debt that you could possibly have. That's tied into your checking account or your current account, your salary account. And the APRs for that are circa 40% here in the UK. It's insane.
Ooh.
So people understanding that there's good debt and bad debt. So bad debt aside, good debt is things like mortgages, things that you can leverage, acquire assets that will then grow in the future. Understanding the fundamental difference between the two is one thing. But I think with
Mm.
technology, and we're talking about fintech here, debt has become a mechanism that is easier for people to access. It is, I mean, we've got
Mm.
pay now, buy later services here in the UK and across Europe, Klarna, ClearPay, just to mention a few. They play a role, but if they're not used responsibly, that becomes an issue.
Mm.
And fundamentally, I
Yeah.
think we spoke a little bit about financial literacy and the ability for you to understand what you have coming in and going out. If I look back over
Mhm.
my journey, I got into debt because I had very, very poor financial controls. I would earn money, just spend
Mm.
it. And because something would then come up, I haven't got any more money, so I need to go borrow something. And because I don't have a stable or strong financial footing with budgeting, well, I've got to repay back that
Mm.
one debt that I've just taken out. I don't have enough money to do that, so now I go take out another one, and it's a big, big cycle. And I think
Mhm.
it's quite a complex subject to approach, but it's an important one that we need to have an open conversation about. But it really
Mhm.
does come back to the point of, if we have that basic foundation in place around budgeting, debt
Mhm.
becomes avoidable a bit later on.
Or manageable
Mm,
even in some cases. So you mentioned Klarna, and I wanna bring this up because Kevin and I are both alums of Klarna. So we're seeing huge innovations in the way that debt is lent out these days. And I personally believe there's nothing new under the sun because I remember back in the day going to the department store and it was called layaway back then. So we'd buy a new washing machine and we put it on layaway, or a bicycle for Christmas, and you would pay towards that thing and then buy it at Christmas in small installments. We've kind of flipped the script now, and you do have these buy now, pay later players like Klarna, Affirm, Afterpay, ClearPay, etc. So, Kevin, how have these companies changed the way that we use debt today?
I think the most visible way they've changed how we use debt is that, like you mentioned it yourself, the way that these kind of debts for making purchases used to happen was done through the store you went to buy things, right? So the
Hmm.
store had some kind of agreement with a credit provider to give people credit, and these modern companies are going directly to consumers and helping the average person get loans, which it
Mm.
can be better in some ways because it means that the customer is the one who is the consumer, the human being is the one who's actually working directly with the credit provider, which means they can get more direct
Hmm.
information. But there's also a risk, of course, that it's easier to misuse as well. because it's
Mhm.
not as closely connected to the store which you bought it at, right? So I
Yeah.
think it becomes really important that us as people in the finance industry uh, treat customers smartly and respectfully, and don't give out bad debt, like you mentioned, Peter, right? That debt that is guaranteed to put someone in a position they can never pay back. I think
Yeah.
when fintech companies and these modern finance companies do it well, they're really transparent with their pricing and help consumers understand the cost of these kinds of tools better than they would have previously. So some companies show up dollar amounts, or the money amount you're actually paying in fees instead of a percentage, because it's really hard for anyone
Mhm.
to understand what does it mean that I have 16.7% interest rate. But it's much easier to understand. Oh, I need to pay $25 per month on paying back this, right?
Mhm.
It's so I think there's ways to be
Yeah.
much more transparent with customers that can help reduce the chance of going into a situation you can't get out of.